Aloha, I'm Susan Varsames. Thank you for having me on this morning's Spruce Society. I was asked to talk about sensory processing disorders and how we can use our botanicals to support our pediatric population. So, just as a way of some background, I am a special ed certified professional. I've been working in the field of autism and sensory processing disorders and with children diagnosed with attention and hyperactivity disorders for about 4.5 decades now. So, it's been a long career for me. And what I want to do is break down the sensory processing and sensory integration concept for you to make it really palatable, to make it easy for you to understand, and to be able to use some of our Young Living products to support your kids. So here we go. Feel free to put any comments in and I can answer them later. And also feel free to email me with any questions that you have even after this at susan at holisticlc.com. So, my center in New York, called the Holistic Learning Center, supports children we work in classrooms and we consult with teachers and we go in and manage behavioral components so that students can be as successful as possible. And being a holistic provider, we have all kinds of tools under our belt. So that's what I want to share with you today as well. But first, we're going to talk about what is sensory integration. It's a little bit of an overwhelming concept if you're not a pediatric occupational therapist, but basically think of it like executive functioning. It's not an all or nothing process. It's not something that you have or you don't have. It's a way that your brain works on a continuum of efficiency so that you can take in information and process what's going on around you and then have an adaptive response and get through life. Whether it's a simple thing like mommy told me to go get my shoes, or I was told to get ready for school, or someone said touch your nose, or someone asked me to write a paragraph about um, a historical figure. How many things do we need to take in and remember and process in order to get that done? So that's what we're going to talk about. So really, sensory integration is a three-step process. Step one is we have to take in information in our environment. Think about yourself right now. Are you looking? Are you listening? Are you feeling the chair around you? Are you managing stimulus around your house or in your office or in your car? So we're always taking in multiple bits of information, and we actually have seven senses. We often talk about the five that we learn in kindergarten, which is the visual, the auditory, the gustatory, which is taste, olfactory, which is smell, and tactile, which is touch. But there's also proprioceptive and vestibular, which become really important in the concept of sensory processing. So proprioception is the information we get because our body is in space and we are feeling what's going on around us and we're getting information in through our joints, through joint compression. So you're sitting in a chair right now, or perhaps you're walking and you feel your feet on the ground. That's giving you a sense of where am I in space? Where does my skin end? Where does the world begin? So if you've ever seen a toddler in the block area with a huge block who's like spinning around and knocking down all of his friends and not having any sense of like how big does this block take up? How much space does this take up? And what's going to happen if I move? That's an example of proprioception. Like, where am I? I think of it as the "You Are Here" button on the map. When you're in the mall and you're standing in front of J.C. Penney and you're looking for Victoria's Secret and you kind of never been there before, how do you figure it out? You go to the map and you start with "You are here." You find that little star, that little dot that says this is where you are and therefore the rest of the world is here. So that's a quick explanation of proprioception, and it's a huge part of sensory processing. And then the other one, besides the top five, is vestibular. And that's when we take in information from the fluid in our middle ear and it gives us balance. It helps us to figure out also where our body is in space. And it helps us to figure out how to negotiate and motor plan through a hallway or through an obstacle course, or how to climb up on something so that you can reach. So all of these systems have to work together in order to function. But many times, what happens with our students and with our own kids is that they're taking in way too much information at once and they're not sorting it out. This happens to us all the time. It doesn't mean that something's broken, it just means that your level of efficiency is a little off. Did you ever go like this to see what time it is and you realize, I have no idea what time it is, or I'm not even wearing a watch, or my eyes saw what time it is, but my brain didn't process what it means. So I have to go back and do it again. So that's just a simple example. It doesn't mean that you have a visual disorder. It's just that you didn't process the information so that you can't use it to figure out your next step. So what happens in the three-step process of sensory integration is the step one is we take in the information, and we had to think about, did we take in the information efficiently? So if I say to a child, show me your thumb, and the child goes, well, they didn't hear thumb, they heard tongue. So did their auditory system even take in the information efficiently? And if the answer is no, then that's a step one issue, okay? And that can happen in all of the senses. In step two, that's when we're attending to the stimuli, and so that we can make sense of it and file it in our brain with like information so that we can have an organized step three, which is the adaptive response. So sensory integration is this three-step process that looks at the efficiency of, did I take in the information, did I make sense of it and process it and file it with like information, and then can I go ahead and use it when asked to do so, and when I'm called to do so. So I like to think of learning as a change of behavior as a result of experience. So when we go through our experiences of the day, our climbing, our crawling, our going to school, our listening to the directions from our teachers and parents, are we taking that all in and then able to apply it and remember it when the next situation comes up? And that very much hits on a concept in sensory integration called generalization. Can we generalize information from one setting or one situation to other scenarios? So, for example, if I said to a 4-year-old, if I was holding a bowl of snow and a lighter, and say to them, have you ever seen anybody take a lighter and put it near snow? And they go, no. Well, what do you think's going to happen? Well, it's going to melt. And I'll say, how do you know that? You said you've never seen this before. Well, one time I was in Cape Cod with grandma, and I was in the back of her car with my ice cream, and it dripped and it melted. Well, it's not a ball of snow and it's not a lighter, but what did the child learn that they did generalize is that hot things make cold things melt. And that's why we don't have to teach neurotypical learners every single concept in the entire world, because so much of it gets figured out because you've lived in other similar situations, and then you can apply it to a brand new set of stimuli. And so sensory integration helps us to do that by attending to all of the environmental stimuli, taking it all in and making sense of it so that we can learn it and then change our behavior and adapt and apply it in other places. So that's step three. That adaptive response is when we go ahead and we have to remember something, we retrieve it, and then we go ahead and follow a direction or apply it to a new situation. So one of the concepts I want to review with you before we jump into all our good botanicals is how sensory integration can fluctuate. Some of our learners are hypo-responsive and some are hyper-responsive. The hypo-responsive learner needs a lot of stimuli to figure out what's going on in the world. They are low responders. They are the ones in a fire drill when the alarm is sounding, they're looking around going like, what, where's everybody going, like, why are you leaving the classroom, like, yeah, there's a noise, what's the big deal, right? A hyper responder only needs a little bit of information and they are like set over the edge, so the fire bell goes off and they're covering their ears and freaking out and not knowing what to do and can't function. So we have a level and a continuum of efficiency in that response as well. Are we under responsive and need lots and lots of stimulus, or are we over responsive? So let's say, for example, the tactile sense. Someone with low motor planning and low motor tone in their mouth, let's say someone with Down syndrome, for example, may have oral motor low tone. And so they might put a Cheerio in their mouth and kind of just like spit it out, like, well, what is that? It's not enough information for me to figure out I'm supposed to start chewing. Whereas someone else with a hypersensitive mouth, maybe not able to handle something like a yogurt with berries in it. It's like too many textures and they're like smooth and bumpy and it's so confusing. So we can be hypo or hyper responsive in any of the senses, and it can change. You might be hyper auditory and hypo visual, etc. And when I walk into classrooms, sometimes I see these beautiful bulletin boards, and they're like bright and neon, and let's leap into reading. And these spotted, animals are all holding books, and it's just like, what is going on with these neon posters? It's like so much visual information that the kids can barely even like pay attention to what's in front of them on their desk. Um, so a child with hypersensitivities in the visual sense would have a really hard time attending in that environment, and may do really well with like wearing a baseball cap or a visor, or having a little screen in front of their desk where they have low stimulus. So you can adapt the environment depending upon the response to hyper or hypo planning. And it affects lots of things. I mean, think about motor planning, negotiating your way through a gym, figuring out how to sit on the steps and get your shoe on and tie it. Like, it just takes so much ability as it relates to, am I looking? Are my hands and eyes working together? Is my visual system able to maintain watching what I'm doing so that I can get my fingers together to, make my loop and tie my shoe? So I want to just jump into what is it that makes processing really efficient versus what is it that makes processing inefficient. And the big deal is the gut brain connection. So, our brain really needs vitamins and nutrients and copper and selenium and zinc and organic food and all of that to be able to function. And so, when we have a gut issue, we have a brain issue. And when we have a brain issue, it's really difficult to process efficiently. So, I'm not going to focus specifically on diagnosis today, but you can imagine how this can apply to ADD, ADHD, autism, Asperger's, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy. Like, so many of our diagnoses in the pediatric population depend on looking at a scale of how efficiently the body can learn. And that's really what it comes down to. So what we want to do to get our environment in the best possible um, place for our kids to learn is start with the home, and go with your, and I'm preaching to the choir here, I know this, but you want to just remind your friends too and your teachers, you want a no toxin environment. So using your thieves cleaner in classrooms, in your home, in your car, talking to the school bus company that's like bleaching the back of the seats that the kids are sitting on their way into school. If you're interested in this topic and if you need references, I would look at a book called Is This Your Child? And then a second book about the environmental toxins called Is This Your Child's World? And it looks at the efficiency of the brain when things like the exterminator comes into the school, for example, and it looks at writing samples when the kids did not have the exterminator come through. And then the morning that they did come through, they look at the writing samples, and you see that the motor planning completely falls apart. So, Is This Your Child and Is This Your Child's World are two great references if you want to talk to your schools about that. And the author is Doris Rapp, R-A-P-P. So the environment's a big one. Clean it up. Go no toxin. I think everybody's good with that. But just ask me any questions and email me if you have questions about that. And then I like to make it really easy and just think about the gut as it supports the brain. And I call it weed, seed, feed, just like your garden. If somebody came into your garden and poured gasoline all over your soil, you'd have to do the same thing. The first thing you have to do is you got to clear out the soil. You've got to get the microbiome available so that what the seeds that you put in there can grow. And the same is true with the microbiome of our gut. So the first thing we need to do is use our botanicals to detox the body. So, for example, if your child has a lot of mercury in their body, then you can safely use cilantro and put that on their feet. I would use it after a nice warm bath, and putting it on the feet before bedtime with little socks over it. Many children, cilantro's that kind of smell that you either love it or you hate it. So if your children are very sensitive in the olfactory system and they're hypersensitive to smells, you can just dilute it and then with any carrier oil and then go ahead and put socks on over the top or wait till they fall asleep and do it then. Um, for things like food, I would eliminate things that are sprayed with pesticides. I would eliminate things that are genetically modified. We have an amazing cereal. Our einkorn cereal is incredible. Our einkorn flour to make your own bread and to make your own pastries and cakes and those kinds of things are really good ways to settle the gut and have nutrition get up to the brain. And we have to remember, we always say you are what you eat, but that's not true. We are what we absorb. And so if malabsorption is an issue, we have to clean out the gut, and using things like tummy jies or the kids version of digies is really, really important to get that on the belly. And I would do that 3 to 4 times a day. If you have a little one, I always use first, second grade as like my dividing line. But below that, go with the Mighty collection. So things like tummy jies, for example. And my belly is really, really sensitive. I use tummy jies myself. But if they're older and if they've got that rock gut that you feel like you can't penetrate, then go with digies and just dilute as necessary in getting that on their belly. You can also use the VitaFlex points and put it on their feet as well, at the place of the gut of digestion, so that if they are aversive to the smell, you can put it under their socks. Okay, so there's that. Now let's talk about things like Mighty Pro, Mighty Zyme, and Mighty Vites. So our vitamins are amazing. I use them myself because when I hand them out to my grandkids, I always take them myself. But if you look closely in there, the ingredients are so perfect for brain support. And this is what we need in order for our kids to take in and absorb so that their brain can manage processing efficiently. So that's a really good one. I also really like Unwind for the hyper responsive child, the one who seems to be taking in all stimulus. So this is the kid who is not able to pay attention to the teacher because Johnny over there is sneezing and there's a bird chirping outside and all the stimulus is coming in at the same time and they're unable to sort and filter. So getting a good night's sleep and being able to focus is really, really important. So going ahead with Unwind is a big one. What else? I want to talk a little bit about, go back to hyper and hypo responsive and talk about citrus versus flower. Okay. Citrus is alerting. Okay. It's for the child who kind of is lethargic in school and slumping in their chair and everything's exhausting. And citrus perks up the body. So you can pair this with homework, with sitting down to study your spelling or that kind of thing and alert the body. I like to put these little spray tops on so that I can spritz in the room and I'll say, it is time for learning, learning, learning. It's time for learning. Come check this out. And kids are like, oh, what's that? That's cool. And everybody gets to smell the lemon or any of our citruses. Those are alerting. Versus and that's really good for the hypo responsive child that needs a perk up. But lavender or any of the other flowers, geranium, etc., are calming. So if we use those for our hyper responsive child, it calms their neurology and they're able to sit in a chair and attend at circle time, etc. So there's a really cool book called How Is Your Engine Running? And I often talk to kids about how is their engine running. And if they're way up high and they need to chill, we're going to go with a floral. If they're lethargic and way down low and they need to perk up, we're going to go with a citrus. So we have tons of them. So find the ones that are best for you, but that's the general idea. In terms of feeling like I'm overwhelmed, I can't do this day. The bus is too noisy, the birthday party is too much, I can't deal. We want to give our kids valor for that. But we do have our the Kid Sense line, and it's called Kid Power. and that is just a sweeter version. It has citrus in it. I believe it's orange, and that can be used either by teaching them to drop it into their hands. So you always want to go about 4 inches above, and once that drops in, taking your peace fingers, opening up the vibration of the oil with a clockwise movement, and then hands, and then big inhales up into that olfactory bulb. So big inhales. But even before Kid Power was on the market, I used to use Valor all the time with frankincense and just dilute it with something sweet. So if you don't have Kid Power, but you have Valor and Frank, that is amazing for the kids that are really nervous about school and about stimulus, going into a concert, going into a birthday party, that kind of thing. So Franken Valor is a great one, and you can dilute it as necessary, and or Kid Power is amazing for that. Cilantro we already talked about. I also want to talk about just getting a good night's sleep. Um, so when it's allergy season and kids are really sniffly and they're not sleeping well, you always want to tackle that first with sniffles. This is really gentle, but it is cut with coconut oil. So if you have coconut sensitivities, you may just want to make your own blend and use another kind of carrier. Like if they're not allergic to almonds, you can use almond oil or any other massage oil or RV6 or whatever. And then you go ahead and you can put that right under the nose because it's really gentle and it's well diluted. And open up the airways to get that oxygen going for a better night's sleep. And then, of course, combine it with Sleepy Eyes. So that's a great one to put together. What else did I want to tell you? Other things such as our Kids Sense lotion are very, very helpful for calming the body, and then using that to combine any other of the oils. And don't forget Genius. Okay, so Genius is like brain power. So brain power vibrates at 78.3, which is exactly how our brain vibrates. So when you need to support the brain, using Genius is a great one. For an older kid, over second grade or so, just go with brain power. And you can even just dilute that a tiny bit if you need to. But play with it and see, because you always, with sensory integration, you always want to find that just right place. Um, and that's really all I'm going to discuss for today. This is a really big topic with lots of technical components to it. But the message I really wanted to give you is don't worry about sensory stimulation in terms of everything that's coming in, as much as sensory integration. How are concepts coming together so that you're making appropriate associations between the environment and the behavior? So the way we act in the gym is very different than the way we act at church. The way we run in the hallway at school is different than the way we run on the football field. And so, as we integrate the environment and have things make sense and have more efficient brain power, so many of the academic skills come together because the brain is more able to take in all of that information. So, to keep it simple, I promised the team I'd keep this under 30 minutes, is clean house, clean gut, clean brain. Detox where you have to, and supplement with our vitamins, our enzymes, again for absorption. So our enzymes are super important. Um, and lots of fun activities, lots of heavy movement, working and doing homework on the floor, laying on your belly, being like this during story time, and having proprioceptive input in through your whole body. Crawling, getting that midline stability so that you can get mobility further away from the body. So if your child's having fine motor issues, you want to go and do lots of activities that strengthen the core. Okay, it's called proximal stability for distal mobility. So we want to strengthen that core so that the hands can do the handwriting or the penmanship or the puzzle or whatever it might be. So I hope you enjoyed this. Please tag your friends that may benefit from this. And really excited about a couple of things that I don't know a lot about yet, but I suspect are going to be really magical. And those are our new deep spectrum oils. So the orange cacao which is really for ceremonial use. It really opens the brain. We'll see how that does for our kids with sensory processing disorder. And then the frankincense squared. Are you kidding me? That's freaking brilliant. Amazing, amazing to see that that's going to be 8 to 10 times more powerful than frankincense by itself. So using that for calming and for higher cortical processing, like imagination, creativity, writing poems, coming up with rhyming words, like, oh yeah, Frank on that. And then the other one, which is the coriander sandalwood, I haven't even begin to dive into the backstory on this. But remember, if we're detoxing heavy metals with cilantro, coriander is cilantro's seeds. That's the life. So I can't imagine what that's going to do for cleaning up the gut. And then throwing it in together with sandalwood for grounding, and anything tall tree deep roots is all about grounding. So I can't even wait to start playing with this on the feet of my little ones and my little students and friends and grandkids. So that's all I've got for you today. And please don't hesitate to ask questions. Susan at holisticlc.com if you need to email me anything. And I appreciate having the space to do this here on Spruce Society. Aloha.